Hey, you. You're finally awake.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going back to the worst games on the NES. You all seem to really enjoy the first video, so I decided to make a second one. Now these games are not necessarily the worst games ever on the NES, but these are the ones that you all commented on in the first video, so blame yourselves if you don't like what I've picked here. And as always, if you think there are more that I've missed, put them in the comments below because we can always make a part 3. Now before we go into this list, if you like this content and think I deserve it, please hit that like button and subscribe button, it really helps the channel grow. If you want to hear more of me, Retro Wars is a weekly podcast, and this week we're covering Turok, the dinosaur hunter for the N64. And we've got a $1 a month Patreon where you can join the Smut Squad and get your own show called DLC. Right, let's get into it, shall we? 7 of the worst NES games, part 2. Wolverine. When Wolverine finally slashed his way onto the NES in 1991, fans were hoping to experience the untamed fury of Marvel's most beloved mutant. To be fair, Wolverine is the GOAT in my opinion of all the X-Men. Unfortunately, what they got was a game that felt more like a budget beat-em-up wearing Wolverine skin. Published by LJN, oh yes, a company infamous for botching licensed properties, Wolverine became yet another name on their growing list of failures. The game is a side-scrolling platformer with beat-em-up elements. Players guide Wolverine through repetitive levels filled with environmental hazards and uninspired enemies. While the game gives Wolverine the ability to unleash his claws, doing so causes his health to drain rapidly. Yes, the game literally punishes you for using your powers. Who thought that was a good idea? Who sat there and went, oh yeah, this sounds like an absolute great thing to do. He just injures himself. I know it probably hurts when he pops him out, because literally it's going through all his tendons and stuff and through the skin. But he's probably got used to it, and he's got healing powers for God's sake. Like, this bizarre mechanic literally contradicts everything we all love about Wolverine, and he doesn't really care about his own health, he's just kind of like a berserker. Hit detection in this game is spotty, with Wolverine often taking damage, even when he's clearly not touching enemies. His jump feels stiff and floaty, making platforming just feel like a chore. And thanks to sluggish punch animation, fighting feels more like flailing in the dark, rather than slicing through foes with precision, because in reality, he should be annihilating everyone. There's no rhythm or satisfaction in the combat, just frustration. Enemies are completely generic, with little variation and even less intelligence. Many simply walk back and forth, acting as little more than speed bumps. Boss fights are equally bland, lacking strategy or spectacle. Even Sabretooth, Wolverine's iconic rival, is reduced to a forgettable battle devoid of any tension. The level design does nothing to help the situation. Environments loop and blend together with minimal detail or logic. You'll trudge through jungles, sewers, and factories with no narrative cohesion, which makes every stage feel like filler. There's no story-driven purpose or build-up, just a sequence of disconnected zones, like even Sonic did a job of that. Visually, the game is completely uninspired. Wolverine's sprite is bulky and awkward, and the animations are choppy. The background art is simplistic, lacking any flair or personality. Now by 1991, the NES was capable of far more, like we're getting onto the Super Nintendo by this point, and Wolverine looks like a rushed product that was slapped together without any artistic direction. Surprisingly, the soundtrack is one of the game's only redeeming qualities. It features energetic and complex compositions that feel completely at odds with the rest of the experience, yeah, because that's good and the game's shit. Unfortunately, even a good soundtrack can't salvage a broken game. The story is pretty much paper thin. Wolverine is simply going after Magneto and a few other villains with no cutscenes, no dialogue, and no emotional weight. For a character with such rich lore, the lack of narrative investment is kinda glaring. It's as if the developers assumed players wouldn't care. Well, they will. Upon release, Wolverine received a tepid response. Critics pointed to its broken controls and repetitive gameplay, and even younger players found it tedious. Any players found it tedious. It failed to attract a fan base and quickly became buried under a pile of better superhero titles. Today, Wolverine is remembered as a squandered opportunity, a game that had all the potential in the world and blew it with awful mechanics and lazy presentation. It's a perfect example of how a big game character isn't enough to make a good game. Take note, Insomniac. Silver Surfer. Next, we're floating into space with Silver Surfer, a game that has become legendary for its punishing difficulty, baffling design choices, and surprisingly amazing soundtrack. Released in 1990 by Arcadia Systems and published by, yes, yet again, LJN, this shoot-'em-up somehow managed to be both technically impressive and ridiculously broken. Silver Surfer is a horizontal and vertical scrolling shooter, where players guide the titular cosmic hero through the various levels, blasting enemies and dodging obstacles. On paper, it sounds like a typical NES game, but in practice it's one of the most unforgiving games on the system. One hit and you're dead, and worse, everything kills you. Touch a wall, dead. Touch a harmless looking object, dead. Think you're safe for even a second, think again. Think you're going to be in the new Fantastic Four film? Think again. The controls are technically responsive, but the game's design is so tight that maneuvering just causes chaos and causes me an anxiety attack. Enemies spawn from all angles, projectiles fill the screen, and safe spaces are practically non-existent. It's a game that expects pixel-perfect reactions, but doesn't really offer you the tools to achieve them. Now what really drags the game down is its total lack of balance. Some levels are nearly impossible unless you've memorised every single enemy placement. You have to access power-ups, but losing them sends you back to your base form and completely vulnerable. This cycle repeats until you rage quit or miraculously survive through sheer repetition. This sounds like Battletoads. Each stage is themed around obscure Marvel villains like Mephisto, which could be a neat touch if the visuals weren't so crap. Often it's unclear what you're even looking at. Is that a statue or a projectile? A background detail or an instant death trap? You've got no idea with this game and it makes it more frustrating than it should be. The boss fights are simply the only highlight in this game. While still difficult, they offer a sense of scale and design rarely seen in NES titles. Unfortunately, getting to them without dying dozens of times is just a feat in itself. You're going to need nerves of steel and the patience of a monk. Graphically, the game is detailed and ambitious. The sprite work on Silver Surfer himself is smooth and the enemy designs are creative. Unfortunately, you can be as good looking as you want, but it's undermined by the obscured level of difficulty and the visual clutter. The soundtrack though, as I mentioned, is nothing short of incredible. It features amazing tracks that are way too good for a game this punishing. And it's often cited as one of the best NES soundtracks ever made, and honestly, the only people who want to play this game, just put the intro on and just go on YouTube, you should be fine, don't play the game, just get the YouTube soundtrack and you'll be fine. Upon release, Silver Surfer was met with confusion and frustration. Critics acknowledged its visuals and music, but tore into its ridiculous difficulty and obtuse gameplay. It quickly developed a reputation as a game that looked great, but wasn't worth the effort to finish. Today, Silver Surfer is a cult classic, but only in the ironic sense. It's a kind of game players use to test their endurance, but not for general fun. It's infamous, brutal, and totally unforgettable, for all the wrong reasons. The Adventures of Biobilly. Released in 1989 by Konami, The Adventures of Biobilly attempted something ambitious, merging beat-em-up gameplay with driving and shooting sections. Unfortunately, that ambition didn't translate into execution, and the final product became a chaotic mess of poorly balanced mechanics and frustrating design. The game tells the story of Billy West, a crocodile-wrestling Louisiana tough guy who must rescue his kidnapped girlfriend from the clutches of crime boss Gordon. Just call the police, mate. You move through side-scrolling levels, punching goons, shoot enemies in first person using the NES Zapper, and drive a jeep through trap-laden roads. While this sounds exciting in theory, each mode is fundamentally broken. The beat-em-up sections suffer from horrendous controls and extreme difficulty, Billy moves like he's wading through mud, and attacks feel absolutely crap. And as always with these sort of things, the enemies will often gang up on him, and with no crowd control mechanics or invincibility frames to save you, it's just a mess. Jumping is stiff and makes you an easy target for range foes and environmental traps. The driving sections, however, are perhaps the worst offenders. You're tossed into the third-person perspective and tasked with avoiding mines, shooting cars, and staying on narrow roads. The physics are clunky and the vehicle handles like it's on ice, colliding with anything, walls, other cars, or even scenery usually spells instant death. Then there are the light guns shooting levels, which are only playable with the NES Zapper. If you don't have the accessory, then you're screwed, because you're stuck trying to aim with a clumsy cursor using the controller. These segments are wildly unfair, with enemies appearing at lightning speed, offering no reaction times, and it's hard to enjoy when success is based on more than luck than skill. One of the most baffling things about Biobilly is that its Japanese version, Mad City, was significantly easier. Konami deliberately increased the difficulty for Western release, believing American players wanted more of a challenge, or they just wanted to see us cry. But this decision actually turned an average game into an unbearable one. Graphically, the game is passable, but quite unimpressive for 1989. Sprites are blocky, and backgrounds are muddy and repetitive. The character has limited animation, and visual effects like explosions and dust clouds are minimal. There's no visual flair to compensate for the flawed gameplay. The sound design is also grating. While the soundtrack has a few catchy tunes, the repeated hit sounds and weak attack effects quickly become annoying. Even punching someone doesn't feel impactful. Reviews at the time were mixed, with some praising its variety, but others pointing out its extreme difficulty and clunky controls. Over time, it became infamous among NES collectors for being nearly unplayable without heavy memorization and absurd perseverance. Today, The Adventures of Biobilly is a cautionary tale of how ambition can't compensate for poor execution. This could have been a fun genre mashup, but instead it's a prime example of a game trying to do too much and failing at absolutely everything. Mario is missing. Now this is probably going to wind a few of you up because some of you tried to defend this on the Super Nintendo, and I don't think it's defendable. I really do. I will fight you. I will fight you to the death. When Mario is Missing landed on the NES in 1992, it confused and disappointed players expecting more platforming adventures. Instead, like the Super Nintendo version, they got an educational title that swapped Mario for Luigi and replaced jumping on Goombas with geography quizzes. Developed by the software Toolworks, it tried to blend learning with entertainment and missed the mark on both fronts. I don't care what anyone says. In this game, Luigi travels the globe searching for Mario, who's been kidnapped by Bowser. To save him, Luigi must retrieve stolen artifacts from cities around the world by answering trivia questions about landmarks, historical figures, and cultural facts, because yes, that'll beat Bowser. It's not an inherently bad concept, it is, but the execution leaves a lot to be desired. First and foremost, the gameplay is tedious. Luigi walks through cityscapes that nearly all look identical, talking to NPCs that provide clues. You must match artifacts to their respective countries and answer multiple choice questions. There's no action, no puzzles, and certainly no platforming, just endless walking and guessing. The game structure is incredibly repetitive. Every level follows the same dull pattern. Find artifacts, talk to people, return items, and move on. The lack of variety quickly wears down the player, especially those expecting a traditional Mario experience. It's clear the game was designed more than classrooms and living rooms, and that's where every parent would have gone wrong who bought this game. Graphically, Mario is Missing is very basic, even by NES standards. Luigi's sprite is decent, I'll give it that, but backgrounds are plain and city maps are dull. NPCs are repeated constantly, and many look out of place or lack any cultural accuracy. There's little charm or creativity in the visual presentation here. Sound design doesn't fare much better either. The music's forgettable and overly simplistic, looping endlessly without variation, with the sound effects being minimal and generic. There's no iconic Mario jingles or sound cues to ground the player in the familiar world of the franchise. Adding to the confusion is the inconsistent release of Mario is Missing across platforms. It was also available on the PC, SNES and the Mac, which each had their own versions, and this led to further frustration as players found the NES version to be the most watered down of them all. Reception was lukewarm at best. Educational publications gave it some credit for teaching geography, but most gaming outlets and players panned it for being boring and a portrayal of the Mario name. This lack of gameplay and polish meant it never connected with either its educational or gaming audience. Despite Luigi being the star, the game failed to give him any personality or development here. It wasn't until Luigi's Mansion that the character was finally given a proper spotlight. In this game, he simply wanders silently, a placeholder for the real hero. Mario's Missing lives as an oddity, more infamous than hated. It's one of those games that makes you ask, what were they thinking here? And while not unplayable, it's unquestionably one of the strangest entries in Nintendo's history. Deadly Towers. Oh, a few of you mentioned this one. Few games have the kind of dreaded reputation that Deadly Towers carries. Released in 1986 and developed by Lena and published by Broderbund, it was one of the earliest action RPG hybrids on the NES. It had ambitions of depth, exploration and dungeon crawling, but all that ambition was buried under confusing mechanics, cryptic design and a complete lack of polish. In Deadly Towers, you control Prince Maya, who must infiltrate the titular towers and destroy 7 magical bells to prevent an evil overlord from taking over the kingdom. The premise sounds pretty promising, and the early screenshots suggested fantasy epic. The players quickly discovered that the game's difficulty and poor design made progress nearly impossible without a guide. The game is top-down and features action RPG combat. You throw a sword in cardinal directions, dodge enemies, and navigate mazes of all rooms that all look virtually identical. There's no map system here, and you're constantly entering hidden rooms that teleport you to random areas, often without warning, and this is an absolute recipe for disorientation. The movement and controls are stiff. Prince Maya glides around the screen like he's ice skating, and his sword attacks are sluggish. The delay between input and action can get you killed repeatedly, especially when enemies swarm from all sides. Combat is rarely satisfying here, and it's more about avoiding cheap hits than mastering skill. Visually, Deadly Towers is plainly bland. Rooms repeat the same brick patterns over and over, enemies are palette swaps of one another, and there's very little in terms of animation or effects. There's no visual payoff here, there's just the same crap over and over again and nothing that's rewarding you for progressing. The biggest frustration here is how completely cryptic everything is. You're rarely told where to go, what to do next. Doors lead to random places and power-ups are indistinguishable from traps. There are even invisible warp points that punish exploration, and it feels like the developers deliberately designed it to waste the player's time. The difficulty curve is completely unbalanced. Enemies do massive damage, experience and gold and grind is slow, and upgrades are overpriced. Health regeneration items are rare, and there's no intuitive way to recover after failure. It's a grind, but in the worst possible way, and I love the grind. The music is repetitive and grating. It just loops constantly and offers no variation between areas. Combined with the identical looking rooms, the audio makes the game feel like a maze designed to frustrate and fatigue. At launch, Deadly Towers was one of the earliest RPG-like titles on the NES, but players quickly realised it wasn't much worth the effort. Reviews were harsh, criticising the game's directionless and punishing mechanics. It's even been rated as one of the worst NES games in several retro gaming polls. Today, Deadly Towers is almost a rite of passage for us retro gamers. Those who played it remember the frustration vividly, and many use it as the standard by which other bad RPGs are judged. It does remain a cult classic, but in the worst way. A towering example of how not to design a game. Karate Champ. Before Street Fighter II defined the genre, there was Karate Champ. The arcade version, released in 1984, was a landmark moment for fighting games, pioneering the one-on-one duel format. But when it made the leap to the NES in 1986, the results were far from legendary. What should have been an historic port became a cautionary tale for everybody. In Karate Champ, players control a white-clad martial artist in a series of one-on-one matches. The game uses a strange control scheme where two buttons perform different moves based on directional inputs. This system worked well on the arcade thanks to dual joysticks, but it translated poorly to the NES controller. On the NES, those complex inputs became frustratingly imprecise. There's no feedback or fluid animation to show what move you're pulling off. Sometimes a press results in a high kick, sometimes a sweep, sometimes fuck all. It seems like your success hinges more on luck than skill. What makes it worse is the judging system. Every fight is scored like a real karate match, first to 2-point wins. But the judges often award points arbitrarily. You could clearly land a hit and it will be ignored, while your opponent scores a hit that looks like a whiff. It breaks any sense of fairness of competitiveness. Clearly those judges are being bribed, why can't we punch the judge? The AI is also erratic, so is the judges. At times it does nothing, other times it becomes near invincible, countering every move. It doesn't feel like you're fighting a human opponent, rather than a random number generator that sometimes lets you win, if you're nice to it and give it a cuddle at night and a kiss on the cheek. Maybe not that. But multiplayer fares better, but the awkward controls still are there. Graphically, the game is simplistic. Fighters lack detail, backgrounds are bare bones, and there's minimal animation. There's none of the flair or personality you'd find in later fighting games. No unique characters, no stages with any character, just generic areas and looping sprites. The sound design is also crap. There's barely any music here either, just a few beeps and clangs to donate attacks and round wins. Without a strong visual or audio identity, the game lacks immersion or excitement of other early NES fighters like Urban Champion. But despite its flaws, the arcade version of Arcade Champ remains influential, but the NES version failed to capture what made it great. It stripped down the game's complexity and charm, leaving a slow, frustrating mess that couldn't compete even with the earliest competitors. At the time of release, players were already beginning to demand more from fighting games. Compared to later hits like Double Dragon or Kung Fu, Karate Champ looked and felt outdated. Reviews pointed to the poor control and absolute lack of depth. Today, Karate Champ on the NES is largely forgotten except as a novelty. It did have the potential to bring competitive fighting to the home console, but instead it became a relic of a genre still figuring itself out. And finally, Bible Adventures. Rounding out our list is Bible Adventures, one of the most infamous unlicensed NES games ever released. Developed by Wisdom Tree, a Christian game developer, Bible Adventures was sold primarily through religious bookstores and This is going to be the greatest review of a video game ever seen. Honestly, I'm going to praise this game. It is going to be so good. They sold millions of copies, and if they didn't, they're lying to you, Jesus. I apologize, but I swear this is the best game ever made. Forget anything else. I never sinned. I've taken this game to heart. I've taught my children the Bible studies. You're okay now. You can go. Yeah. Have a good day. Whatever you're smoking. He's gone. Good. Now, this game kind of bypassed Nintendo's strict quality control, and he has gone, hasn't he? Yeah, he has. And oh boy, you can tell. The cartridge contains 3 different games: Noah's Ark, Baby Moses, and David and Goliath. Each story loosely follows the biblical narrative, but turns into a strange, often nonsensical platforming objectives. For example, in Noah's Ark, you carry animals over your head and stack them in the ark while dodging angry goats. Yes, really. The gameplay is clunky in all 3 modes. Your character can lift objects, including cows, hay, or babies. How can he lift cows? But the physics here are broken, well obviously so. Objects float oddly, characters clip through platforms, and there's little rhyme or reason to enemy behaviour. It feels like someone tried to clone Super Mario Bros. Without understanding why that game even worked. In Baby Moses, you're tasked with carrying the baby safely through hazards while avoiding soldiers. Drop the baby, and he'll often float off screen or vanish entirely. The game doesn't even end. You're just stuck there wandering aimlessly until you reset. It's both hilarious and horrifying. It's like, oh, baby's gone. Better reset the game. No, you need to reset. Do it now. Ridiculous. David and Goliath is the closest thing to an action game, where you gather sheep and then face Goliath in a laughably underwhelming boss fight. You throw rocks until he eventually kneels over, and then the game ends with no fanfare. The entire arc is over a minute and leaves no impression. We're definitely doing this for the podcast. Graphically, the game is below even the NES standards. Sprites are simple and flicker constantly. Backgrounds are bland, and many levels just reuse the same visual assets with different colours. There's no visual storytelling here, just basic shapes and stiff animations. The sound is also terrible, the music's repetitive and uninspired, often looping a single melody for an entire level. Since it wasn't licensed by Nintendo, Bible Adventures was never featured in official magazines or given the seal of quality. Despite this, it actually sold reasonably well within its niche audience due to its religious themes and novelty status. I can guarantee there'll be a lot of parents who bought this. Better teach my kids the way of Jesus. Critically though, it was slammed across the board. Reviewers pointed out the terrible controls, nonsensical gameplay, and any lack of fun. Even Christian media struggled to recommend it, noting that the message was undermined by how broken the game was. Today, Bible Adventures is a meme-worthy oddity, often featured in angry retrospectives or speedruns. It's not just a bad game, it's a weird cultural artifact that proves just how wild and unregulated the NES era really was. And that's it, 7 of the worst games on the NES Part 2. Are the ones I need to talk about here? If there are, please let me know in the comments. The more comments, the more likes, the more people get eyes on it, and the more videos we'll be able to do. And as I said at the beginning, if you think I deserve it, please hit the like and subscribe button for more content. I'll see you all again in 3 days for another video. Until then, my name's Danny, take care of yourself, bye bye.